everyone, my name is Kirsty Machin. I'm the Executive Officer of Positive Women Victoria, and I am the MC for the 2022 International AIDS Candlelight Memorial. I wish to commence today's event by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today, the peoples of the Kulin Nation. I also pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I want to welcome you all here today as we mark the 39th anniversary of the first Candlelight Memorial all around the world. AIDS Candlelight Memorials just like this one have been held on the third Sunday of May since 1983. This year, the theme for Candlelight Memorial is Arts, AIDS and Allies, and we recognise the role the arts have played in telling the story of those living with HIV, the importance of allies to the HIV community, and how people living with HIV have used the arts to challenge the issues of stigma and discrimination. And I'd like to make a few personal reflections here at this point. In 1991, I went to a meeting of the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP. ACT UP's striking logo had been on posters, pavements, walls and bus stops around King's Cross where I lived. It was one of the first enduring pieces of AIDS art, and it challenged people like me who were appalled at how society was treating people living with HIV and AIDS, but didn't know what to do about it, to, well, do something. The US ACT UP founders knew that art is powerful. It can generate reflection and rebellion, it can solve loss, it can speak the truth, and it can expose lies. It can shock, it can galvanise, and it can create community. ACT UP incorporated performance, street art, poetry, photographs, and used branding and marketing against corporate greed, and the power of the media against the power of the media. It called for radical action to save people's lives. Silence equals death is still one of the most recognisable symbols of the early decades of HIV, and it's a compact call to action in the name of life, and a piece of conceptual genius. Some people who are here today or online will be familiar with the great artists of the pandemic like Keith Haring and David Wojnarowicz. But Australia has also had its own art from the front lines of HIV. In painting and visual arts, the unforgettable David Mcdermott and the gifted Aboriginal artist and HIV activist Aaron Meeks. In theatre, Alex Harding's Blood and Honour was one of Australia's first HIV-related stage plays, and very sadly, Alex died earlier this year. In music, Lyle Chan's shimmering and transcendental AIDS memoir quartet of 2014 honoured the lives of the HIV activists Bruce Brown and Tony Carden, both of whom were themselves artists. Bruce was an accomplished musician and organist, and Tony, who had worked as an actor in New York, contributed an important piece of visual art to the pantheon of HIV art in Australia. Warrior Blood was a collage of thumbprints in blood from people living with HIV and their allies, and it brought together doctors, nurses, pharmacists, nuns, gay men, heterosexual men, AIDS activists, and is now part of the Powerhouse Museum collection. Tim Conagrave's memoir, Holding the Man, told of the author's 15-year love for his partner, John, and their life with HIV in the 1990s, a work which has had both stage and film adaptations and is now a canonical part of Australian literature, taught in schools, and a big part of cultural memory. In 2019, Heather Ellis published another important HIV memoir, Timeless on the Silk Road, the second episode in an account of a solo motorcycle odyssey that began when she rode across Africa. This second volume recounts, with compelling bravery, authenticity and personal honesty, Heather's experience of receiving a HIV diagnosis in London in 1995, the last thing she was expecting. Her response was, as Freddie Mercury once famously urged, to get on her bike and ride. And she did, across Europe and following the Silk Road, eventually making it to Vietnam and then home to Australia. There's a rainbow at the end of Heather's story, Her diagnosis came close to the breakthrough that was protease inhibitors, and the drugs that artists and activists mentioned in this speech had fought for saved Heather's life. Her own book opened up speaking opportunities and a chance to do what great HIV art has always done, to answer the great enabler of stigma, silence, with articulate experience. I hope my story, writes Heather, will help make right an injustice against millions of people. During the COVID lockdowns, women from HIV for Around Australia had an opportunity to participate in an extraordinary art project, using art to express what it has meant to them to live with HIV. The mighty and beautiful outcome can be seen at positivitywomenproject.com.au. These paintings and poems document diagnosis, grief, love, joy, sex. They're fierce and they're focused. Wrote Diane, I am going to have a voice. I am going to spoil myself. I am going to wash the paint off my hands. As the New York artist David Wojnarowicz said in his incandescent and devastatingly humane HIV memoir, Close to the Knives, one of the masterpieces of its time, this is life, let's swim in it. So I'd encourage each of you today to swim with, engage with, or re-engage with, and honour the lives and the works of one or some of these amazing artists. I would now like to introduce the following speakers for today's event. Our panellists today are Ros Bellamy, Philip Adams, Heather Ellis, and Jacob Bowen. Ros Bellamy's pronouns are they, them, and Ros is Editor-in-Chief at Archer magazine and a PH candidate and casual academic at La Trobe University. Ros is the moderator for the panel. Philip Adams is the Artistic Director of Dance, Performance and Arts venue Temperance Hall in South Melbourne. And Philip has had a long involvement in the LGBTQI community and witnessed the impact of HIV on the artistic communities of New York and Melbourne in the 1980s and the 1990s. Heather Ellis is the Communications and Engagement Coordinator at Positive Women Victoria, as well as an artist. She was diagnosed with HIV in London in 1995 and nearly died from AIDS in 1997 in Cairns. Heather holds a Bachelor of Journalism and Master of Arts Creative Enterprise and is the best-selling author of 2 best-selling travel memoirs. Jacob is a Melbourne-born and raised artist of the Narangga and Kaurna nations in South Australia. Jacob's debut solo work, Blood on the Dance Floor, produced in partnership with Ilbjerry Theatre Company, premiered in 2016 at AIDS House North Melbourne to critical acclaim, followed by a season at the Sydney Festival. Jacob is a previous board member of Living Positive Victoria. Our 2 positive speakers are Steph and Clint, who will speak about their lived experience of HIV, the role of their work in the arts has played in helping them through their individual diagnosis. Finally, the CEO of Living Positive Victoria, Richard Keane, will present his speech on this important day. And I must also mention the wonderful voices of the low-res male choir, which will entertain us with 3 beautiful songs over the course of this event. We feel very privileged to have the low-res male choir perform at Candlelight Memorial since 2014. A very special thank you to the President of Low Res, Michael Horden, the Musical Director, Jeff Urquhart. We appreciate all that you have done to make this such a special event. We now move on to the panel discussion.
Hello everyone, my name is Ros and I'd like to welcome you to this panel today with 3 pretty exceptional speakers. We've got Philip, Heather and Jacob here today, who are here to share some of their insights into the role that the arts plays, telling the story of people living with HIV and AIDS. And we'll get right into it. It's a short panel, so let's get as much as we can out of these 3. What have the arts meant or provided to people living with HIV and AIDS and their communities over the decades? We might start with you, Philip.
Sure. I've sort of prepared a little opening statement here, which I hope we can capture and spill that conversation down the line. And It's just really nice to be on the panel with these people. It's fantastic. I appreciate this. Now, I was thinking, since the beginning of the HIV epidemic, the arts have played a central role in the HIV response and shaping opinions and documenting the personal, community and global HIV stories. In wealthy countries like North America and Europe and Australia, the HIV epidemic have hit hardest in those individuals and communities that have historically had strong connections to the arts, notably the gay and transgender communities. Without promoting stereotypes, gay and broader queer communities and their ghettos tend to be overrepresented in the arts world. Such communities have provided and enabled environments in which creative thinking and action has been able to flourish, whether it has been the fine arts, dance, theatre, cinema, literature and fashion, and where patronage for the arts has concentrated. It is also those communities where the HIV transmission and impact has been highest. Therefore, there has always been the connection between the epidemic and the arts. These communities that have been most affected are often the most marginalised and vulnerable. I fit into one of them, gay. Youths, transgender, individuals, sex workers, people who inject drugs, those communities that don't necessarily have strong voices or influences in a broader society. Through the arts, these communities have been able to be heard and have been able to communicate to the broader audiences to convey real life experiences and amplify messages that wouldn't normally be heard. So therefore, I conclude by saying in this opening little moment here that HIV in itself has also provided an unparalleled richness for subject matter for the arts, a vehicle for communicating in the modern day tragedy of individuals and families, personal conflicts and coming out stories, stigma and discrimination, and the greed of the big pharmaceutical companies, the failure for health systems and the miracle for new treatments. All topics that have catalysed the new and pioneering direction of the arts globally.
Wonderful, thank you. Heather?
The arts have always been a really very, very important platform for women living with HIV because women often were lived in fear of rejection. They lived in isolation, particularly in the first decades of the HIV pandemic. They really had no one to talk to, and it wasn't until Positive Women Victoria was founded by two women living with HIV who met, and from there the organisation has been going for more than 30 years. In 1991, a group of women bravely told their stories on a video, Positive Women Speak Out. It was probably one of the first times in the world that women had the opportunity, or women living with HIV were filmed and told their story, and that was to raise awareness and break down stigma. Following on from that, Anne Fallon, the Australian actress, became Positive Women's patron, and through her work, she was then in the play In the Family that was written by Graham Pitts. Again, another piece of art that raised awareness of women living with HIV and all the issues that they faced in a world when we were a minority within a minority. They sort of their work with in the play and Positive Women Speak Out, and also a book was published not long after that in 2006, Blood Ties, which told the story of 5 women living with HIV. Prior to all of this, the general public sort of didn't see HIV as affecting women. It was just something that affected gay men, but women were affected just as well and dealt with issues of stigma and fear and isolation in their life. Also in 2006, another group of women bravely had their bodies photographed with words written on their bodies. This was a body of knowledge. So these were life-size photos that were exhibited right throughout Victoria, and took that exhibition to the general community where people could see the messages in these women's bodies, beautiful, healthy bodies, and these were women living with HIV. So yeah, there's, art has been so very powerful and very important for women living with HIV in Australia and around the world.
Thank you. And Jacob, I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts as well about what the arts have meant.
Well, I suppose the arts really is what makes up a pretty healthy component of our culture, regardless of where you are in the world. And culture really is the stories we tell ourselves to understand the world we live in, yeah? So for myself, as a man, a cis gay man from the Narungga and Kaurna peoples of South Australia, I was born to a white mother and a black father. Very fortunate to have a foot in both camps. I first started my journey into the arts as a dancer. I trained at the National Aboriginal Islander Skills Development Association. Try that 10 times. NAISA, College of Dance. It's Australia's oldest running Aboriginal Islander dance college. So I studied there, and that was in the mid-90s. And in the mid-90s, HIV was still running rife. We were on a precipice of getting new drugs. But we also, at Sydney, there was a whole group of us from all over the country were flocking to Sydney, not only to dance, but to explore our sexuality as gay men. And as Aboriginal gay men, there was a lot of us that were being affected by HIV. A lot of us were having to deal with the stigma of being detected or as diagnosed as HIV. And consequently from that, and I'm sorry for any triggers that this may cause, there was a lot of suicides around that because there was a lot of misunderstanding in our communities about what HIV was, how you caught it, what it meant. And at that time it meant death. So I've been fortunate to not only have a career in the arts that has gone for almost 30 years, but I've also been positive for 24 years. I've been living with HIV. And while there are a lot of stories that we see in the arts and in the media, in film, in visual art, in theatre, in dance, that document the journey of HIV, not only in Australia but around the world, for myself as a positive Aboriginal gay man, I didn't see our stories anywhere. So in 2013, being a working and supported artist, I felt that I had agency to be able to put my personal journey of living with HIV for 20-something years out on the table for everyone to see, more as a responsibility to add that voice to a canon of work, of theatre and dance in Australia that had an Aboriginal voice to it, that put an Aboriginal voice at a table. And since then, we premiered here at Arts House in North Melbourne. That was in 2016, and since then has gone on to tour nationally in mainstream theatres and festivals. It's won a Green Room Award for Best Independent Production and also toured Canada. So I suppose for me, the arts really has been a vehicle to be able to put my community and to honour the community that I grew up with back in the 90s and who I need to pay homage to, the ancestors that I need to pay homage to, give them a voice, give them a platform.
Absolutely, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so what we'll move on to discussing is what myths and stereotypes the arts have helped to destigmatise. And we might start with you, Heather. It's okay.
I'd like to answer this question in a way that arts has stigmatised, has sort of perpetuated that HIV stigma. And I just wanted to share my experience with you about the rock musical Rent. So Rent, if you don't know it, it was, ran for 12 years on Broadway. It first started in 1996 to about 2005, ran for 12 years, longest running play on Broadway, grossed $280 million. was various productions were shown right around the world. One of those productions was in Sydney, and that's where Rent and my life collided. I was in Sydney for a weekend and I thought I'd go and see Rent. I'd heard about this play, very excited about it. There I am sitting in the front row and I was completely horrified. And this was because people were dropping dead left, right and centre of AIDS. So one of the lead characters, a female, was a drug addict with AIDS. So it was perpetuating those myths and stereotypes that people were still dying of AIDS. And this play sort of came out in 1996, like at the same time that protease inhibitors were discovered and just saving people's lives. It was a year after I had recovered from AIDS, and these protease inhibitors had saved my life. And here was a play that was just showing the world that people were still dying of AIDS in New York, in a Western country, when they had full access to the ARV treatments that were saving their lives. So I quickly scribbled a letter to the lead actor about my horror and went to the back door and shoved it in his face. And just to, this was like my protest about, why this play was so stigmatising against people who are living with HIV. And here we were really trying to break down the stigma. And that was the first sort of time where really, we've got ARVs, we're, living healthy, long, productive lives. And even then, if you've got an undetectable viral load, you couldn't transmit HIV sexually. We didn't know that then because it wasn't backed by 20 years of evidence. But and here we were, still living in the dark ages with this play that thousands, if not millions, of people had watched and then was made into a motion picture. So, yeah, so that's my story about Rent.
And did you want to add anything about destigmatising from the arts?
Well, the art that women are sharing and producing, like my books, Ubuntu and Timeless on the Silk Road, particularly Timeless on the Silk Road, because that really shares my journey and takes the reader into the world of someone who's diagnosed with HIV when this was just before treatments, a year before treatments, when, death was inevitable. That's all that waited for me. But by doing that, it was to show what it was like, what those feelings were like. And at the end of that story, so we had the treatments and, I sort of rose from my deathbed and then went on to live a healthy, long and productive life. And so I sort of continued doing a lot of public speaking about that story just to break down that stigma, because even today, people don't know about the treatments. They don't know about U equals U. So they're like, it's a surprise to them when they hear what I have to say about living with HIV in 2022.
Thank you. Jacob.
Look, I'm in Heather's camp actually with this question.
Yeah.
Because while I do think we have had a history of arts and culture, whether that be through film or media, design, personalities within that world, who have put personal stories or more so educational pieces about, the facts around detecting HIV or contracting HIV. There's a lot of stuff that's out there that the arts have done educationally around the facts. However, I also agree with Heather in terms of there's been a lot that theatre, film, particularly, and television have done to stigmatise HIV, and particularly around the fact that it is a virus that only affects cis, gay, white males. There's a lot of film, a lot of content, a lot of television, a lot of theatre that is about that experience, and you don't really see much else. And when you do see it, it is generally stories around sex, sexual activity or drug taking. So you never really see the personal aspects of the person who has hopes, who has romantic aspirations, who has a family, who has responsibilities, who has a job. You know, it's always a discussion around sex or drug taking or how you got it. There's still that kind of, how did they get it? I mean, and now in 2022, but last year I think it was, It's a Sin that came out. So while I do think it's important that we keep the histories of the people that have been before us, that is always important, because how else are you going to move forward if you don't know what's come prior to you? We do need those histories, but we're also in a very different time. We're living with HIV, we live longer, we now have initiatives, wonderful initiatives like LPV have launched with the over 50s, you know, living with HIV over 50. You don't see that in media, yet we've got a whole kind of reintroduction of memorial stories about dying with HIV. And like Heather, I've been living with HIV, and there's a lot of us living with HIV, that I think that's what the responsibility I think the arts could take moving forward, is to shift the direction, shift the conversation a little bit, and just be a bit more open about who they include in the conversation.
Thank you. Philip, did you want to add?
I think many things, and incredible stories there. Oh, gosh. I'm just going to fast back my memory to Mardi Gras 1990. Yeah, I'd been living in New York for 1 year and I came back and I went to Mardi Gras, and I came back with a cargo of anger and people that had passed away, and this discrimination, and being part of, you know, ACT UP was arriving, and the word is in the silence of death in the campaign. And so 3 other friends and myself went to Mardi Gras, and we went naked and we walked up Oxford Street, and we painted our penis each as AIDS, and at the back our bum said ACT UP. And that's pretty wild to walk up up Oxford Street in 1990. And William Yang shot us, and, you know, I saw him across, you know, on the way, sort of following us all the way to the Horden Pavilion. And so my point in this story is that that art and the body and the physical experience of it, I'm a movement practitioner or choreographer, has been turbulent lovers with the dance floor, the disco and the party. And this exchange of fluid and body and sex and drugs is prevalent, and it is today, but it is a new care tactic around that, as we see the emergence of a new generation of positive thinking people, positive or not. We all still charge together the dance floor, and we bring that invitation, and we care with each other at parties like Barber, way we did at Mardi Gras in that time. But also in the dance floors of Roxy and Mars and King Tut's Wawa Hut in New York, where I also performed. And then I was escorted to the Joyce Theatre and the Kitchen and the City Centre, these really high art performance, postmodern art dance world, which I was always in. So there was this exchange that was always part of a high art society, where HIV and AIDS was such a topic of conversation consistently that was exchanged back on the dance floor on Saturday night. So these stories keep revolving around the creation of my work. Even though they bubble under the surface, there's always a tension. And so we look to artists that were mentioned earlier, Peter Tully, David Mcdermott, that today I think of Paul Ure, and I think about the prolific political activation of his work in queer right now at the NGV, that we've come a long way, but there's still always this drama, this tragedy and this stigma which sits as a tension, and we continue to fight for that right to be dismantled as much as we can. And I think if I look back at the history of my choreography, there was only one work where I really kind of went to town, and I had to have my say in, you know, and represent people who are HIV positive, and that was performed here at the art meat market, yes, and it was called Live With It. We all have HIV, and the statement alone drew attention quite quickly to the media. And so, yeah, I keep revolving on the dance floor, and I meet people, I exchange conversations, and today it is a more positive conversation than it was back then.
Can I just respond to that? Because I think it's an interesting, like in that it creates an interesting tension for me because the dance floor is quite communal, it's celebratory, it's almost ritualistic. Yet you take, and if we're talking mostly of the gay male experience, so we're talking about the clubs where a lot of gay men are out there, they're shirtless or they're whatever, but you take the activity and the behaviour that happens in the dance floor and you translate that to online, it's very different. Which goes to show that whatever we've done in the last 40 years is not translating into the cis gay male community because the discrimination that still exists. You can jump on any kind of HIV support group, you know, like an online network, and there will be daily someone posting a Grindr conversation of someone completely, you know, disrespecting them. So I just find it interesting that in that there is a tension because if we're talking just about the cis gay male world, which we both belong to, the dance floor is one set of behaviours, and when we take that away, we take the drugs and the music away, the behaviour that's left online, not so nice. Sorry to be a downer, but Debbie Downer. But I mean, I think there's just still some, like, if we're talking about what the arts has done to destigmatise, I don't know that it's been successful.
No. Certainly campaign and poster has, but that's an artistic forum as well. If I drive my car on a regular basis under bridges and where parties are advertised, the ethnographic and the demographic of people who are represented in positive living campaigns is changed since it was in that day. So I look at David Mcdermott's poster from 1988 Mardi Gras, and I celebrate the same conversation moving forward in the year 2022, where we see Jake Pravalopoulos, you're providing a new campaign coming up shortly of what that representation is today and how that's seen as a political activation in poster history and art history. But Jacob is indeed correct. When this forum becomes an online social exchange, it's violent. And it is very dismantling, and it brings back up the wounds as so much as perhaps the Grim Reaper did in 1992, I can't remember. 87, yeah. And even though that 3-week campaign wreaked havoc on the world, the scars from it's a negative and a positive. And then I went to a Chunky Move performance recently at the substation, and there was a sort of blitz mania of 80s pop culture and 90s history. And there was the Grim Reaper campaign, and I went, it's become a symbol of popular culture, and it's sort of drawn quite rapidly and quite quickly, into being a political statement. But I still think it's a damaging image. As we don't need to go into that and talk about that, but it's interesting how in the hands of the next generation they see it as kind of a comedic space, but also a tragic space.
And I wish we had more time to delve into all these nuances you both just brought up. But I am conscious of time, so I might just leave us with the question of what is happening now in the arts or in the community as well, and what would you like to see happen? So we've talked about a lot of people who aren't represented and also a lot of the ways the arts has been stigmatising. What are you hoping to see in the coming years?
Yeah, well, as I was saying again, it's people living with HIV who are really kind of taking control of our own stories and our own message to end HIV stigma. This year we've had the Positively Women Art Project. So this is a community-based art project where women living with HIV have celebrated their lives living with HIV, but also shown the stigma that they have to live with and that they deal with on a daily basis. Again, this is like women are sort of standing up and sharing their voices and breaking down that stigma. Through Positive Women Victoria, I hosted a podcast, Our Stories, Ending HIV Stigma. So this is a number of women I've interviewed, and they've shared their story of HIV and also, what they're doing now in their life, all the positive aspects of their life, having children, their careers, travelling and so on. And it's these kind of projects which really, they not only get that message out to the community to break down stigma, but they also inspire women living with HIV, women who are newly diagnosed, and up until that point when they're diagnosed, they have really no understanding of HIV other than what Philip had mentioned before about the Grim Reaper and those days of death and dying, because they're completely unaware of the treatments. So these stories inspire women to sort of really take control of their life and follow, reach their potential and follow their dreams and their goals and have children, have a family, and believe that they, it's their right to have a happy life and go out there and take that chance of finding a relationship, of sharing their status with another person and being willing to take that risk and to be loved and have that happiness throughout their life. And that happens by women living with HIV sharing their stories through art, through like my own writing, through the podcast, through the Positively Women Art Project. And we need more of this in the future, more people to share their voices. And I sort of see that, the future of art for the HIV community is the HIV community owning it and carrying on with it, and we can go back and tell the history, but sort of give it, don't put that drama on it like the rock musical Rent did. Like if they didn't have people dying left, right and centre from AIDS, it wouldn't have won, the Pulitzer Prize for drama, because there wouldn't have been the drama there. But if we can tell our own stories, even through history, through the beginning of the pandemic up until now, and tell it in a different light, that like Jacob was saying, shows that we are people and we have hopes and dreams and for the future.
Yeah. Thank you. Jacob, you look like you have thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to go on, follow on from Heather. One of the things that came out of lockdown in 2020, I came back from touring Canada with Blood on the Dance Floor, and I had the fortune to meet a lot of different communities around Canada of people living with HIV. And the one thing I learned while I was over there was that in Canada, one of the biggest demographics of people living with HIV is Indigenous women, yet they have the smallest voice. So when I came back to Australia, 2020 came, we went into lockdown, and at the same time I had the fortune of online meeting Michelle Tobin, who most of you would know. So since then, Michelle and I have been meeting online for the last couple of years, so I document her story and use the skills that I have as a writer and a theatre maker to turn her story into a piece of theatre that will be coming in the next year or so. And titled Imago, which in her language of the Order people means hope. So hopeful stories, like Heather was talking about, stories of people living. We know here in Australia that the demographics, there was the thing in the paper last week of New South Wales have recorded the lowest rate of detections ever. But what we do know is that people of colour and Indigenous Australians, the rates are rising. So the way that the arts and culture can assist in that is also by providing voice. Providing platforms for expression, education. So what I'd like to see moving forward is just a broader, more open and inclusive platform for all kinds of expression, whether you be Indigenous, whether you be born overseas, whether you be trans, non-binary, woman, any of us living with HIV has a platform to express how we are living and how we are surviving and how we are thriving with HIV.
That's beautiful. I might wrap us up there unless you have any burning thing to say, Philip.
No, just that my fellow panellists certainly covered the
They
answers.
did. It was beautiful.
Wonderful.
And I just want to thank the three of you for sharing your insights and experiences with us. And it's given me so much to think about, and I'm sure everyone joining us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to all of the panellists for such an engaging, interesting and passionate conversation. I would now like to invite the Low Res Male Choir to perform their first song, Human, by Rag and Bone Man.
Maybe I'm foolish, maybe I'm blind, thinking I can see through this and see what's behind. Got no way to prove it, so maybe I'm lying. But I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put your blame on me. Don't put your blame on me. Oh, take a look in the mirror, and what do you see? Do you see it clearer, or are you deceived in what you believe? 'Cause I'm only human after all. You're only human after all. Don't put your blame on me. Don't put your blame on me. Oh, some people got the real problem. Some people out of luck. Some people think I can solve them. Lord heavens above, I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put the blame on me. Don't ask my opinion, don't ask me to lie, and beg for forgiveness for making you cry. For making you cry. 'Cause I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put the blame on me. Oh, some people got the real problem. Some people out of luck. Oh, some people think I can solve them. Lord heavens above. I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put your blame on me. Don't put your blame on me. I'm only human, make mistakes. I'm only human, that's all it takes. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put your blame on me.
And thank you to the Low Res Choir for a marvellous rendition of a powerful song. I would now like to invite our first positive speaker to the podium. Please welcome Steph as they present their speech.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie, I'm 25 years old and I'm here today to share my story about living with HIV. First, a bit about me. I was born and raised right here in Melbourne and I bounced around a lot as a kid growing up to my late teen years. Rebellious, some might call it at that age. I had to grow up pretty quickly to look after myself in all ways possible. I don't have any brothers or sisters, I am an only child. I didn't know what I wanted to be growing up as a young adult. It was also a different time then for someone with bright pink hair, eyebrows and tattoos to get a job even at Coles down the road. I went to a public all-girls high school and as someone who identifies as queer, I can't help but look back and think that happened for a reason. Nonetheless, I graduated and I went looking for work, for that's what benefited me more back then. I was brought up loving music through my family, being very musically orientated, so picking up an instrument over time came naturally. I chose the guitar. Any way I could express myself, I would take to. Poetry, music, photography, the arts, expression. This became my love and my life growing up, and to this day, they still are. It makes me who I am today. I feel privileged and honoured to be standing here before you today in this very room. I've never before spoken at a public speaking event, ever in my life, so I'm so thankful that this is the time I get to change that. With something so important, emotional, personal, and dear to my heart for many reasons. I was diagnosed with HIV at the age of 24. Even saying that out loud still blows my mind after a year and a half. At the time I was diagnosed, there was no one there aged 24 or younger that I knew of and that was open about their status. Hence why I feel like it's very important to be here today talking about this and sharing a bit about my story. On the day of my diagnosis, I had no idea what to expect, having to go into the doctors on my own during lockdown. When you are uneducated and you are told those words, you have HIV, you immediately think of death and you think of AIDS. My second thought was Freddie Mercury, but it swallowed me whole thinking that my life was ending at the age of 24. I left the doctors and went back home, a complete emotional mess, and probably smoked about 10 cigarettes within minutes. First thing I did was call my dad, and it was the most heartbreaking conversation I've ever had. I shared my status to 3 family members on that day, and each one of those family members stopped everything they were doing and came straight over to be there for me. I was overwhelmed but extremely grateful. Over the next few weeks, I had figured out that sharing my status to family members helped me process it for myself. We had an answer for why I'd been so unwell for so long. Unfortunately, there's always good with the bad. I've lost friends and family due to coming out public about my status, identifying as queer, and advocating for HIV. These reasons seem to be surrounded by stigma. Upon my diagnosis, I was instantly connected with support and help within the HIV community. I was connected with my new nurse instantly, and over a few months, I attended a workshop called Phoenix for Women. At the time, I was extremely overwhelmed with all this new information, and I was scared to attend anything. But I'm grateful, and I had support to push me past my nerves, for it's one of the best things that ever happened to me, attending that workshop. Meeting other women living with HIV and making lifelong friends with these people through a connection of something we all share. Over time, the more I actively reached out, the better I felt. I learned how to re-love myself as a whole. I shared my status more over time, and it felt really good. It felt like a big release and a big weight off my shoulders. After a little over a year, I decided for World AIDS Day 2021, I would come out public about my HIV status as tribute. And I did, with a TikTok video. I created a fundraiser for World AIDS Day through the Red Ribbon Appeal to raise money for awareness, and to this day, I managed to raise $259 online. Might not seem like much to some, but to me, it was everything. After coming out publicly, the next week that rolled by, I had woken up to messages on my social media platforms from people all over the world, thanking me for coming forward, thanking me for being brave, and thanking me for having someone to relate to as a younger generation going through this. It was and is the most rewarding feeling that I could ever explain and put into words. Knowing I could have possibly helped even one person out there would have made it worth it. This new community I was a part of swallowed me whole and accepted me. Since then, I've been a part of podcasts and YouTube channels talking about my story and advocating in any way possible with any opportunities that are thrown my way. I felt it was extremely important coming from a younger generation as a newly diagnosed person to speak about this, even if it is early on and even if I am still learning about it. In a matter of 2 years, I have had the pleasure of connecting with so many people in this community, and I will be forever thankful to each and every one of them. As a younger generation in the dating scene, it's been hard, as if lockdown wasn't hard enough. Though it had been my choice to put HIV advocate in my Tinder bio, you still never know what the big old world will ask when you get a match. Fear of the unknown, some may say. I'd shared my status to sexual partners before I came out public, and luckily enough, I got the good end of the stick there. But I've also had the bad too. I've lost friendships, family, and even friends due to stigma and small-mindedness. These repercussions still exist. This stigma still exists in this day and age. When I had to visit another doctor for a repeat of my script, I had the doctor look at the joints in my arms as if to say, she must be a drug user. So not only have I been impacted by friends and family, I've been judged by leading healthcare professionals that should know of these facts when working in that field. Fair to say, I never went back to that doctor. We still do get knockbacks for sharing our status, no matter who to. The hardest part I've found over time is the emotional toll this takes on me. At the start of my diagnosis, it was a lot harder, for I didn't have the coping mechanism that I have today. On how to process this, I still have my days where I just need to cry and let it all out. I'm very fortunate to have gotten a majority of good responses regarding opening up about my status, followed with a whole lot of questions. Over time, overcoming that has gotten better and it has gotten easier. As I had mentioned above, I feel it is extremely important to be representing a younger youth around HIV and AIDS. I'm now 25, 26 in May, and I'm proud to be here representing people living with HIV of a different generation. It can be scary getting diagnosed when you are a younger generation, but also feeling like there's no one your age to reach out about this that understands. I'm here to tell these people they now have a person right here willing to listen and help, and a whole community of people also. At this point in my life, I am in the best headspace emotionally, mentally, and physically that I have ever been relating to my HIV status. I have focused on myself these last 2 years, put my emotional and physical well-being first, and have learnt to overcome and heal with time and patience and with a lot of help and support. I am extremely proud to say I am undetectable. I cannot pass on HIV whatsoever. How amazing it is to say that. I am happy and I am healthy, and that is all I need. To start off 2022, for me, I decided to get a little red ribbon tattooed behind the left ear to symbolise strength, unity, tribute to those we have lost, and to show myself I have control of this. I choose to wear my red ribbon on the outside, proudly and permanently, without shame. Thank you for listening to my story.
And thank you very much, Steph, for your moving and amazing speech. It was wonderful, and thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the low-res choir back to the stage to perform the song Together by Sia.
Together we can take it higher. I can hear the thunder coming from your mouth, and I know my numbers. Give me some Stevie Wonder, quick put it on before we go under. I can see the lightning coming from your ears. I see you're frightened. I can see the lion sleeps tonight with the tears you're crying. Ooh, can't love me unless you love me too. Treat yourself like nothing but a fool. Can't love me unless you love you too. Love you too. Come down, set the past on fire. Stand up, raise your face to the sky, my love. Together we can take it higher. Ooh, together. Goodbye to the past, hello to tomorrow. Can't love me unless you love you too. Treat yourself like nothing but a fool. Can't love me unless you love you too. Love you too. Come now, set the past on fire. Stand up, raise your face to the sky, my love. Together, we can take it higher. Ooh, together, we can take it higher. Come now, set the past on fire. Stand up, raise your face to the sky, my love. Together, we can take it higher. Ooh, together, we can take it higher. I want love, I want tears, I want love. Give me the words. I want love, I want tears, I want love. Please deliver. I want love, I want tears, I want love. Please deliver. I want love, I want tears, I want love. Set the past on fire. Stand up, raise your face to the sky, my love. Together, we can take it higher. Ooh, together, we can take it higher. Come now, set the past on fire. Stand up, raise your face to the sky, my love. Together, we can take it higher. Ooh, together, we can take it higher. Together, we can take it higher.
And thank you again to the choir for this lovely performance. It is now my pleasure to invite our second positive speaker onto the stage. Clint will talk about his lived experience of HIV and how his art helped him.
Hello everyone, my name is Clint and this is my story. I've been living with HIV for more than a decade, but today it feels a little bit like a coming out of sorts. It's the first time I'm representing the PSB, the Positive Speakers Bureau, and the first time I stand before a large audience proudly as a positive person. And honestly, the last few months have been transformative. You see, I am a creative through and through. Art is my therapy, my voice, my way to tell the world who I am and to educate. But before we go to my Phoenix moment, let's go back to where it all began, to where a person this fabulous clearly must come from, Lara. For those of you who don't know, Lara is just near the Bad Airport in Melbourne. So I was born in Lara, Geelong in 1981 to childhood sweethearts Gail and Adrian. And just FYI, my dad is my mum's first kiss, first boyfriend, first everything. I have, however, made up for some of her lack of indiscretions and some of yours probably too. You are welcome. I lived a picture-perfect country childhood, complete with two older brothers who became a plumber and electrician, and this flamboyant child was clearly the outsider. I had a female best friend and we loved to dress up in her mum's shoes. I loved to play with dolls and she wanted to play with the He-Man action figures. I also wanted to play with the He-Man, but for different reasons. I even went to an all-boys school called Chanel. I mean, I was doomed from the start, right? All in all, it was a beautiful life. You know, I was loved, different from the rest, but I was loved. And there's something about growing up in a small town that makes you grounded, a bit different from the being in the city, which at the age of 17 is where I fled to, screaming to Melbourne to go to uni, to study drama and dance. Finally, I'd found my people, thespians, people who like theatre, and started to come into my own. I started creating, telling stories, connecting to my morals, to my beliefs and to my community. I also partied a lot and had the time of my life. When I was still just 18, my dad got a transfer with work, and being from Geelong, he worked at Ford. So Mum and Dad were in New Zealand for 2 years. So I went over for a holiday, and this was at the peak of my party career. So after 2 weeks with them, I said to Mum, I'm going out. She goes, you can't go out on your own. I'm like, if you knew what I did in Melbourne. So I went out, met the bartender. Taylor's oldest time, went home with the bartender and stayed over with the bartender. The next day, Mum, Dad and I went out to get fish and chips, or fish and chops for the locals, and hi, kia ora to any Kiwis in the audience. Dad went off to get beers, standard, and Mum turned to me and said, Clint, are you on my team or the other one? I turned to her and said, Mum, I'm always going to be on your team, but I'm gay. Tears, lots of tears. And she said, they told me this would happen if I let you play with Barbies. Didn't have the heart to tell her in that moment that it was probably the He-Man that did it, but then she said something that still rings in my ears to this day. You're going to get sick. But as I mentioned before, I was loved. My parents loved me more than they hated my sexuality, so it was fine. They're amazing, but it took time. Back to me. My friends and I started a theatre company out of uni in 2000 and worked with them for about 10 years, working many jobs to pay the bills, as we all know as artists. And as a rite of passage of sorts, I moved to Sydney to follow a beautiful boy, which lasted about 2 months, but I was in the gay mecca of Australia and I was happy and I was living well. Becoming an accidental makeup artist led to a lucrative career in TV and cosmetics that led me to becoming the global brand ambassador for an Aussie makeup brand. And then, just before my 30th birthday, my boyfriend turned to me and said, I'm really sorry, but I have chlamydia. So I went down to the sexual health clinic, mental health clinic probably too, and I called him a few days later after leaving the doctor and said, I'll see your chlamydia and I'll raise you a HIV. Ouch. I was 29 and I thought, well, that's it. I'm never going to have kids. Who's going to love me now? You know, sex is easy, but who's going to really love someone who's got HIV? Also, I was the face of a natural cosmetics brand. I couldn't be dirty, right? So I stayed quiet. Very quiet. Luckily, I had some amazing positive friends and beautiful support networks, so I was okay. I've been a strong, independent person for pretty much all of my life. So I took the hit and I moved forward in silence to the outside world, disclosing only to my close friends and my intimate partners. I was okay. My meds took some juggling, but we found a way to get me balanced and undetectable. Saying that word gives me pause. That word changes my life every day. It makes it possible to live without fear of passing it on, without constant rejection. There's still so much stigma, but there's a way around it. Flash forward to 2020, the pandemic hit. I was living overseas in London and I had to come home. London to Lara. That's going to make a great movie. For the first time since I was 17, I lived with my parents at the age of 38 and it felt great. Actually, it was a really amazing year. As I said before, my parents are amazing. So how did they take the news of my status? The truth is I still haven't told them. But I promised you a phoenix moment, and it's coming, where I emerge strong and powerful and transformed. But at the moment, I'm kind of a caterpillar. But you wait, there's a beautiful butterfly in here and it's about to open, because coming home has reconnected to me to my art. The creativity I thrive on is storytelling. It's exploration of ideas, and that's where your stuff comes up, you know? All your things sort of raise their heads, and my stuff, I figured out, is shame. When my parents are so bloody brilliant, why haven't I told them? I tell myself all the time, it's because they're not ready, you know? It'll hurt them and cause them stress and, you know, that they don't need to. And that's true to an extent. You know, no one has to come out. You don't have to disclose. The medication's so good that you don't need to worry. They don't need to worry. But the stigma, that's a daily struggle for every person living with HIV. But art can cause change. My art will cause change. I'm now making a documentary to explore how people are living and thriving with this virus. And through this, I started doing research. I've completed 4 sessions already with Living Positive Victoria in 2 months. And I see my way forward. And my personal wish is to show people, like so many beautiful, fearless people have done, so many of them in this room, that this virus will not stop me and shouldn't affect the way that I'm treated in society. It's time for me to stand up and to show people that things have changed, that the Grim Reaper has left the bowling alley and positive people aren't coming for you or your children. To quote a beautiful friend of mine from my documentary and a fellow positive person, there's a time when we have to stand in front of someone and ask them to simply see us as a human being. Well, can you see me? I'm going to tell my parents, and I'm going to be fine.
And thank you, Clint, for your also amazing and fantastic speech. It was really, really wonderful. So I would now like to invite Richard Keane, the CEO of Living Positive Victoria, to the podium.
Hello everyone, my name is Richard Keane. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Living Positive Victoria. It's my pleasure to welcome many of you today to the filming of this 2022 International AIDS Candlelight Memorial. And for those of you joining us remotely, thank you for letting us into your home. The International AIDS Candlelight Memorial is a very special day for me. One thing that resonates for me each time I attend is the love and support from so many of our community. And in this safe space, it provides for all of us to remember and commemorate the lives of so many dear friends and loved ones impacted by HIV who are no longer with us today. The first Australian AIDS Candlelight Memorial was held in 1985 here in Melbourne. On that day, 2 legends of the Victorian response, Tom Carter and Phil Carswell, stood together in the rain in what is now Federation Square and lit candles to remember all those lost to AIDS. Over the past 4 decades, Melbourne has hosted an annual Candlelight Memorial, and we've seen many thousands of people attend these events, both in real life and over the past few years, virtually. The history of HIV/AIDS has been more than a fight for survival and timely access to treatments. It's also been a fight for human rights. In the 1980s, speaking up for people living with HIV and AIDS wasn't just a call to pride, it was also a call to combat prejudice. Everybody, regardless of their individual identity, is susceptible to HIV. And the artistic community drew on their understanding of human nature to publicly challenge the stigma associated with HIV, to empower and protect ourselves and others, to normalise conversations around sex and sexuality. This year's theme of Arts, AIDS and Allies reminds us of the pivotal role that art has played, both in shaping our story, telling our stories to a wider audience. The German playwright Bertolt Brecht once said, "Art is not a mirror to reflect society, but a hammer with which to shape it." The arts have been central to how the lives of people living with HIV have shared their lives and experiences both within the community, but also within wider society. And sometimes it has been necessary to strike those hammer blows for those we care and love most. Over the years, many speakers at this event have spoken about how the art of people like Keith Haring, Kim Davis, David Mcdermott, Peter Tully, Timothy Colgrave and David Menadue have captured the zeitgeist of this era. The importance of key allies in the arts and challenging the misconceptions about living with HIV from those like Elizabeth Taylor, Ida Buttrose and Annie Phelan. The challenges of engaging a wider community that saw HIV and AIDS as something to be feared and those with HIV as a danger to society. Without these allies to share the burden and rise to the task of challenging the stigma, the Australian and global response would look very, very different today. It also reinforces the concept of nothing about us without us. The fact that stigma and myths still exist around HIV means that we as the positive community need to ensure our voices are heard and remind members of the community that they are not alone. In 1993, 2 years before he died, David Mcdermott spoke of how his creativity as an artist helped shape his response to living with HIV. He said, "My priority as an artist has always been to record and celebrate our lives. Having lived through the extraordinary time of redefinition and deconstruction of identities, from camp to gay to queer, and seeing our lives and our histories marginalised every day, we all have the responsibility to speak out, to bang the tribal drums on the jungle telegraph. I'm here, girlfriend, what is new?" We've always created these languages as we've shaped our identities. The diagnosis of HIV often leads us to question our identity and seek to redefine how we sit in a world still marginalised and stigmatised for those living with HIV. Stigma and shame also meant that people who had died from AIDS were often not publicly acknowledged. The memorials were a show of resistance to narratives of shame and secrecy. The purpose of Candlelight memorials has always been to provide support to those affected by HIV. The recognition of grief someone has can change a person's experience of loss and sorrow from a feeling of being lonely or marginalised to feeling valued, supported, and our identities as HIV-positive people being respected. In conclusion, I would like to acknowledge our audience here today, all of the great performers, the great work of volunteers, staff, and our board who have helped make this event happen, and especially the lovely low-res male choir who move us with their beautiful renditions of such amazing songs. Thank you.
So thank you, Richard, for sharing your thoughts today and also for your amazing advocacy for people living with HIV over the years. I would now like to invite all members of the audience here today to switch on your electronic candles and take some time to remember those who have passed away or to acknowledge those still living with us who are living with HIV. And we'll now take silence for about half a minute. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I would now like to invite the low-res choir back to the stage for one last time to perform the song Standing With You by Guy Sebastian.
Standing with you, somewhere only you can go. I won't pretend to know, so instead of telling you you'll be alright, I'm just gonna be that someone by your side. Yeah, let me be that distant satellite, a constant in the sky. 'Cause I'm standing with you tonight. Yeah, I will be that voice in your ear. I'm standing with you, quietly destroying your fear. I'm standing with you, you won't even know that I'm here. I'm standing with you, yeah, I'm standing with you tonight. Standing with you, oh, I will be that pill for your pain. I'm standing with you until the clouds have run out of rain. I'm standing with you, close enough but just out of sight. I'm standing with you, I'm standing with you tonight. Your head is full and yet it's hollow. Don't even think about tomorrow. So if you let me, I will follow. Oh, if you're gonna go, at least you're gonna know. Instead of telling you you'll be alright, I'm just gonna be that someone by your side. Yeah, let me be that distant satellite, a constant in the sky. 'Cause I'm standing with you tonight. Standing with you, yeah, I will be that voice in your ear. I'm standing with you, quietly destroying your fear. I'm standing with you, you won't even know that I'm here. I'm standing with you, I'm standing with you tonight. Standing with you, oh, I will be that pill for your pain. I'm standing with you until the clouds have run out of rain. I'm standing with you, close enough but just out of sight. I'm standing with you. I know I may not say the right thing. Let me tell you one thing. Yeah, 'cause there is one thing you're wrong about. This world would not be a better place. I don't wanna lose you now. Yeah, I will be that voice in your ear. I'm standing with you, quietly destroying your fear. I'm standing with you, you won't even know that I'm here. I'm standing with you, I'm standing with you tonight. Oh, I will be that pill for your pain, until the clouds have run out of rain. Close enough but just out of sight. I'm standing with you tonight. Oh, I'm standing with you tonight. I'm standing with you tonight.
Thank you once again to the Low Res Choir, and thank you also to everyone who has attended today's event. In particular, I would like to acknowledge all the speakers, panellists and volunteers, and the audience that has made this event such an important moment for people living with HIV, allies, loved ones. Thank you and goodbye.